A lot of stoners who smoke weed think that you could smoke weed every single day without any negative repercussions. And I'm here to tell you that that is horseradish. The thing is that these people who smoke every single day, they've been high for so long. Their brain has been fried for so long that they don't even realize the negative repercussions that's going on. It's kind of like the frog in the boiling water scientific experiment. I'm not sure if you guys heard of that. You probably have. But there was this experiment where they took a frog and then they put it in normal water. They put that normal water on a pot and then they started to boil it. They started to slowly boil it. The frog never jumped out of the water. The frog boiled itself to death because I guess it just didn't feel the water getting hot. I don't know. But it's the same exact thing with people who smoke weed. Since their brain has been high for so long, since their brain has not been normal for the longest time, they don't realize the negative repercussions because they don't remember being sober. It's a real thing. I used to be one of the biggest stoners I've ever known in my life. And I didn't know the negative repercussions that weed was giving me. I didn't know that it was actually frying my brain until I actually got sober for a bit. And whenever people try to quit weed, it always happens where, they'll quit for a couple months or they'll quit for maybe 3 months, 4 months or something like that. But they always go back to smoking weed. But within that 3 to 4 months of quitting, that's when you actually realize what it feels like to be sober again. But if you never take that time off, if you only take like a week off or 2 weeks off or something like that, while your body is still physically addicted to the substance, of course you're not going to know exactly what's going on when you're sober. Of course you're not going to know what your brain feels like when it's sober versus when it's high. When you smoke every single day for years on end, you don't notice your brain power just depleting. You don't notice the dopamine inside of your brain just going down and down and down every single day. You don't notice the effects that it has on your serotonin, the effects that it has on your hippocampus, your memory, your endocannabinoid system. That's it, endocannabinoid system. I'm going to talk about those a little bit later, but right now I'm going to go a bit into my story. I used to be one of the biggest stoners I've ever known. I used to smoke every single day, 4 times a day, 5 times a day. Back in high school when I was smoking, that's when I was smoking the most. I was smoking during school, before school, after school. Whenever I had the chance to smoke, I would smoke. So I didn't know that it was actually screwing me over until I did some mushrooms. And then the mushrooms kind of told me like, yo, you should probably stop smoking weed. And of course the mushrooms didn't tell me like it was whispering something in my ear. Like I'm not crazy or anything like that. But I had a lot of realizations when I took mushrooms that weed was just no good for me and that I needed to quit. Obviously it took a long time for me to quit after that. It took me about like 5 years after that to actually fully quit smoking weed. But anyways, after that mushroom trip, I quit for a bit. I maybe quit about for 3 months or something like that. And that's where I got the first taste of what it feels like of being actually sober. Obviously my brain chemistry wasn't back to normal. Obviously I still had some lingering effects and my body was still physically addicted to the substance, but yeah, I felt like what it felt like to actually be a normal person again. My bad, I just had to turn off the AC. But anyways, after the 4 years of me trying to quit, and I actually did end up quitting, my life changed in ways that you can't even imagine. I felt like what it felt like to be sober again. I felt like what it felt like to have normal brain chemistry again, normal serotonin levels, normal dopamine levels, my memory not just messed up, and me not having crazy brain fog to the point where I just can't think or I can't speak. But yeah, my life changed in ways that you probably can't imagine. If you smoke weed every single day, you just don't know what it's like to be sober again. Being sober becomes the new high. I'm not even joking when I say that. Being sober becomes the new high. So anyways, how does smoking weed screw up your brain chemistry? This is something that people just do not talk about. They think that since weed isn't a physically addicting substance, which it actually is, like people don't think it is, but yes, it actually is physically addicting. People think that you could smoke every single day without any negative side effects, or they think that the negative side effects are so minimal that they could get away with smoking weed every day. It's not like you're doing crystal meth or heroin or anything like that. So you're not completely screwing your life over. Like you're not completely ruining everything that you have going on inside of your body. So yeah, this is how smoking weed every single day screws up your brain chemistry. The first reason is because it has crazy effects on your dopamine system. If you don't know what dopamine is the neurotransmitter or chemical in your brain that's responsible for motivation and feeling good. It's also known as the feel-good chemical. So whenever we have anything that gives us motivation, so for example, if we are going to eat some food, our brain spikes with dopamine. Whenever we're going to procreate, our brain spikes with dopamine. Anything that makes you feel good or motivated or you feel that good anticipation to do that thing, that's when dopamine gets released. Your brain actually releases dopamine as well when you're doing that thing. So when you're eating that burger or when you're eating that steak, your brain releases dopamine. You probably already know what dopamine is because I feel like everyone knows what dopamine is nowadays. But anyways, what you're doing when you're smoking weed is you're skyrocketing your dopamine levels to a super unnatural level that your body's not supposed to handle. Your brain's not meant to handle that amount of dopamine. And then after you smoke the weed, what are you doing? You're skyrocketing your dopamine even more. You're watching explicit content. You're watching, adult videos. You're eating junk food. You're watching movies. You're watching anime. You're playing video games. More dopamine-inducing things. So what do you think is going to happen when you already skyrocket your dopamine with the weed and then skyrocket your dopamine even more after you smoke the weed? Think about that. What do you think is going to happen? This is what happens. So when you artificially induce your dopamine too high to levels that aren't like meant for your brain to handle, what happens is your dopamine crashes. It crashes, but it goes below the natural baseline that it was at before. So let's say your dopamine levels were at a zero when you started, before you started doing the dopamine-inducing thing. You skyrocket it to, let's say, a level 50. It then goes down below zero, and it goes down to like negative 10. And then it takes some time for your brain to go back up to normal, for your brain's dopamine system to go back to zero. So that's why you feel like complete shit whenever you smoke, and then you have that come down. That's why you need to smoke more about 2 hours after you get high, because you feel that come down. You feel your body's like, you just feel like shit. You feel brain foggish. You feel what that is your dopamine levels crashing. But you go below the natural baseline, so you're not even at normal state anymore. You need to smoke again to get your dopamine levels back to what it was before. Now imagine you're to do that every single day, multiple times a day. Imagine to do that every single night. What do you think is going to happen to your dopamine system? What do you think is going to happen to your dopamine levels? Like we all know, if you artificially induce something, or if you artificially put anything in your body that your body already naturally produces, your body stops producing that thing. Think about it. It's like melatonin, for example. If you take a bunch of melatonin pills before you go to sleep, and you have to take melatonin pills before you go to sleep every single night, what's going to happen? Your body's it's going to stop producing natural melatonin because you're already getting it from an external source. You're already getting it from something else. Same thing with steroids. When you take testosterone and tren and all that sort of stuff. If you take testosterone, what's going to happen is your body's going to stop naturally producing it because you're already getting enough. Your body adapts to that. You're already getting enough from an external source. So that's why people who take steroids, they have freaking, I don't know, their balls shrink, or they get gyno, they get man tits and all that sort of stuff. Just negative things happen when you artificially put a chemical in your brain or in your body that your body already produces. So people's dopamine levels in their brain who smoke weed every day, they're screwed. They're fried. They're literally fried. Their brain can't produce normal levels of dopamine unless they smoke weed, and that's why they have to smoke weed every day. That's why they have to smoke weed before they do anything that they do. Before I went to the movies, I had to smoke weed. Before I watched a TV show, I had to smoke weed. Before I ate, I had to smoke weed. That's why you have no appetite. That's why you have no appetite, and you need to smoke weed to be able to eat, because your body just doesn't have the motivation in it, the motivation chemical, dopamine, to go and do the things that it needs to do. That's why stoners are so lazy. And if you're a stoner and you're watching this, I'm not lazy. I'm not. Yes, you are. You probably, chances are you're lazy. So smoking too much weed ruins your brain chemistry in the dopamine center, and it literally depletes the chemical in your brain that's meant to give you motivation. It depletes the chemical in your brain that's supposed to make you feel good. That's why you feel super dull every day, and you don't feel like doing anything, and you don't feel like talking to people, and you don't feel like eating, unless you smoke weed. That's why you can't study, or you can't do your work or your homework without smoking weed, because you need the dopamine in your brain from the weed to do that certain task. So the next thing is your serotonin levels. Weed has an effect on your serotonin levels. I know it's not naturally flooding your brain with serotonin, just like how other drugs like MDMA and those sorts of drugs do. I might be wrong about that, but it affects your serotonin levels as well. And what is serotonin? Serotonin is the chemical in your brain that's responsible for mood regulation, emotional regulation, that sort of stuff. So if your serotonin levels are super out of whack, then you're going to feel like depressed, you're going to feel sad, you're going to have mood swings, all that different type of stuff. It's also known as a feel-good chemical in your brain as well. And when you smoke weed, it kind of like raises your serotonin levels a bit. It doesn't directly flood your brain like what I said before, but it has like some sort of effect on your serotonin levels that make your body produce more serotonin in that moment. So yeah, just like the dopamine examples, what happens when you artificially induce serotonin levels rising within your brain? It gets out of whack. It takes it out of homeostasis. It takes it out of the natural balance that it already has. So two feel-good chemicals right there are getting played with. Two feel-good chemicals are getting screwed with there when you smoke weed every single day. What do you think is gonna happen? This is why you feel like an emotionless zombie. This is why you feel super dull. This is why it feels like there's no color in your life unless you smoke weed. This is why you can't do anything unless you smoke weed. So the next thing is your endocannabinoid system. I feel like I can't say that properly. But what is your endocannabinoid system? Your endocannabinoid system, a lot of people don't really know about this, but it's the thing that regulates your mood, your sleep, your stress, pain tolerance, all that different type of stuff. You could kind of see it as like your body's balancing chemical. So it balances things within your brain and balances things within your body. So what happens when you smoke weed is that weed has an effect on your endocannabinoid system. Within your endocannabinoid, I'm just going to call it ECS. Within your ECS system, you have these things called CB1 receptors. And CB1 receptors is the thing that's kind of responsible for producing the endocannabinoid chemicals and that sort of stuff. But what happens when you smoke weed, the THC within the weed hijacks the CB1 receptors. And it kind of like unnaturally produces that sort of endocannabinoid chemical. So when the THC is hijacking those CB1 receptors, what's happening is your body is unnaturally, artificially inducing rushes of balanced chemicals within your brain. So what do you think happens if your body is unnaturally inducing those balanced chemicals within your brain? Same exact thing as the dopamine and serotonin examples. Everything goes out of whack. The ECS system is responsible for sleep, mood, pain regulation, all that different sort of stuff. So what do you think happens when you are screwing with that system? When you're artificially inducing those things within your body? It gets out of whack, it gets screwed over. And this is exactly the reason why you need to smoke weed every day, why you feel as if you need to smoke weed every day. People say it's psychologically addicting, but I think it's physically addicting as well, because if your body needs this stuff to function properly, then you are physically addicted to it. And in the comments in my last video, people were saying like, oh, weed's not physically addicting. It's not, you're uneducated. Weed's not physically. It's physically addicting. Like what I said, if your body needs a substance to run normally, your body is addicted to it. If you need to smoke weed to fall asleep, you are physically addicted to it. If you need to smoke weed to eat food, then you are physically addicted to it. I don't care what you say, you are physically addicted to it. Obviously, it's not the same thing as smoking crack or heroin. Like you're not itching yourself. Your body's not going to crazy withdrawals if you don't have it. Or I guess with weed, your body does go into withdrawals. You get like cold sweats and that sort of stuff, and you can't sleep, whatever. Obviously, it's not as physically addicting as something like alcohol or different drugs like meth or heroin or whatever. But it is still physically addicting, and you can't deny that. People like to try to justify that their bad habit because they don't want to quit or whatever. But it's physically addicting and it is psychologically addicting. It is both. So that's how it screws up your brain chemistry. You're completely screwing yourself over when you're smoking weed every single day. You're basically, what you're doing is you're making your brain worse. You're literally making your brain worse, and you're making your brain operate at less than half the percentage that it's operating at right now. The first thing that I noticed when I stopped smoking weed is that I just didn't feel good. Like my brain just didn't feel good. Like normal things that would kind of stimulate me when I was smoking weed, when I was high, wouldn't stimulate me like that anymore. But that's because my brain was so fried that the dopamine levels in my brain just weren't back to normal yet. So it took some time for me to actually feel natural levels of dopamine in my brain. So after a couple months, or I'd say probably maybe a month or two of me not smoking weed anymore, I actually felt the dopamine levels in my brain go back to normal. So I could now watch a movie without smoking weed. I can now watch an anime episode and feel stimulated by it and actually enjoy it without weed because my dopamine levels in my brain and my serotonin levels in my brain are normal. So people don't realize what life is actually like, which is going to be in the next video actually. People don't realize what life is actually like when you stop smoking weed. People are walking around a shell of themselves because their brain is just not working properly. They're addicted to weed because they need that weed for their brains to function normally. Basically like how people are addicted to antidepressants or addicted to different things that screw with the homeostasis within your brain. That's literally what's happening right here. And a lot of these people who are addicted to weed, they're not even smoking to smoke weed. They're smoking to get their dopamine levels or their brain chemistry back to what it would actually be like if they weren't smoking in the first place. Really think about this. The reason why you're smoking weed is because your dopamine in your brain is screwed up. It's messed up. So you're smoking so you can get your brain levels back to what it would be if you were sober in the first place. Really think about that. Like if you smoke weed every single day, think about that. If you weren't smoking at all, then you wouldn't need the weed you wouldn't need weed because your brain levels are normal. But yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. But those are just my thoughts about it. If you like the video, then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and leave a comment on this because I'm really curious on what people think about this. I'm really curious on if people felt the same exact way. And I know people felt the same exact way because I know a lot of stoners. If you're a stoner, then you know a lot of stoners. I also know people who quit weed as well, and they say the same exact thing. So leave a comment below if you agree with what I'm saying or if you disagree with what I'm saying. We'll have a discussion within the comments. Like the video, share the video with a friend who needs to hear it, and yeah, subscribe. Thanks, guys. Later.